Welcome, everyone, to Table Talks. I'm so glad you've joined us again here, where go grab your coffee, grab your tea. I'm Janelle, your host. We're going to sit down with Bryan. Bryan Hubbard is he is the creator of Timelight, a transformative therapeutic, I can talk, method developed from his personal journey overcoming chronic depression. Bryan developed the timeline approach from his own healing journey and philosophical studies, weaving together spiritual insight, trauma work, and neuroscience. So, this is going to be a really good conversation as he just unfolds what he's observed, what's behind some of the things that we will see in our lives as patterns. It could be anger, it could be failure to succeed, it could be I can't be on time to save myself. So, a broad scope of things that can be in our lives, different things that I'll call effects, and what's really driving those, and how can we shift from anger to I can be at peace. There's an approach that goes beyond the talk therapy. And I know you've seen me speak to this before about, that's an effect, but where's the root? Bryan is right on that same page with me, and he has this beautiful technique and program that he's put together that he's going to speak to today. You will enjoy this. You're going to get so much insight about yourself and maybe hopefully shine some light on some patterns that you've seen in your life and what can you do to shift those. So go, like I said, go grab your coffee or tea and join Bryan and I in this conversation. Enjoy. Bryan, it is amazing to have you sit down with us here at Table Talks. We appreciate you sharing your time and your insight and wisdom. This is about someone who has learned from their journey, isn't it? You have learned from your journey.
It's very true. It's all about that. But it's really, from that and trying to sort myself out, I think I've, hit upon a universal truth or truths, which I think would benefit many other people as well.
Yeah. And you have come about you've created what you call the Timelight therapeutic method. And that has been born from your own personal research and self-healing. So if you don't mind, I have looked and studied a bit about what you're doing. I'm intrigued, and I know that our audience is going to gain so much from hearing your story and really where did or how did you develop what started the development of Timelight?
Okay, sure. Well, Timelight is just to reiterate, is a therapy, as you rightly say. It's a spiritual therapy,
Okay.
and it's one that recognizes that time itself is energy, and that it's the responsibility or the ambition, if you will, of every human being to overcome the energy of time and to become timeless. Because the fundamental point, I believe, of a human being is that they are eternal, but don't know it. And that is the real call to arms that I think, for us to evolve further and create a world that is better than one we seem to be living is to recognize the fact that we are eternal. So time light is an attempt to help people overcome time, but
Okay.
time, as I say, as an energy. So how all this came about? Well, I was abused for about 6, 7 years, psychologically abused by my father, up to about the age of 7, during which time he never spoke to me, he never uttered my name or talked to me at all. And his only means of communication with me was to whistle. Eventually, my mother said, "Well, I think you better start talking to your son." But this had caused quite a bit of damage, as you can imagine. I wasn't dripping in self-esteem, as I entered adulthood. And I don't know about I can't remember which year it was, but I crashed into chronic depression for about 10, 11 years, to the point of wanting to commit suicide. But the thing was, I made no connection at all between what had happened to me as a child and the depression. It never occurred to me there was any connection at all. And I think it's true of a lot of people. I think who suffer from various, call them mental issues, where it's anxiety, depression, phobia, etc., and don't really connect that with what happened to them as children.
Mhm.
And I hadn't. And but I knew that I just didn't want to live like that anymore. I just didn't want to have this depression. I had so much going for me. I had so much reason to be joyful, and I wasn't. And I just wanted to know what was happening. And then one day, this one expression just crashed. The only word for it, it crashed into my head, which was, "That to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. That to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down." I had no idea where it came from. I had no idea what it meant. But it started me on the exploration from that point on. What did this mean? What is its significance, and so forth and so on. The messaging sort of carried on a little bit and told me that human beings are made up of three time selves, and that was the end of it. That was then I was on my own. I had to work this out, and I spent some years, well, 3 or 4 years, researching this to understand this better, to understand especially what that one central message meant. And it was quite a journey of discovery for me. But and there are lots of clues along the way. I mean, just prior to this thing happening to me, there have been a few clues along the way. One was my own father, and he was 90, but he was incredibly healthy. And they said he got a heart of someone like 20 years younger and all the rest of it. And but one day I went to see him and he was in bed and said he'd had enough. And I didn't know what to make of that. And I just said goodbye in my usual way. And then 3 days later, my mother phoned to say Dad has died. And I guess in a way he'd died because he'd had enough. And, I think a lot of old people sort of do. And I sort of didn't quite understand what he'd had enough of, I guess, of life. But that was and then just immediately prior to this discovery, if you will, was I was reading a book about ghosts, which a professor from in Canada, Professor Ian Stevenson, had researched. And he risked his own academic career in doing this research, but he discovered that there were many instances of ghosts where there was a visitation from someone who had passed but had unfinished business. And I suppose it was the fusion of those two things. Here was my father dying because he's had enough, and ghosts or beings that existed beyond death but had unfinished business. And I think it was the culmination of those two thoughts that gave me this expression. I don't know. Anyway, so that was the sort of background clues to it. But then I had to go into the world and discover it. And there were a number of things I discovered which no one else had really noticed or hadn't, if you like, finished connecting the dots. For example, in 1997, the Kaiser Permanent researchers put together what were known as the 18 ACEs, which is adverse childhood events. And this ranged from all sorts of things, from relatively benign things such as your parents weren't at home when you got home from school, right the way through to incest and parents being on drugs and going to prison, right across the field. Anyway, they put this list together and they tracked 3,500 people and made amazing discoveries, such as that people who suffered 6 or more of these ACEs died 20 years before someone who had one or none at all. And this has been going on for some years now. The idea of adverse childhood events actually influencing health. And this is, quite well known. That Columbia University has now cited it as the 4th major cause of death in America, and it accounts for about 450,000 deaths every year. And the thing is, though, so whilst this is recognized, it seemed to me that no one was really completing the picture, because say, well, why? Why could it be that, things that happen to you when you're 4 determine how long you'll live, or whether you'll get cancer, heart disease, and all the rest? Why on earth? What's the connection? And then I realized that the connection was energy, that we are anyway energetic systems. But one of the first big insights of Timelight was the discovery that Time is energy. Time doesn't exist anywhere. We make time up in order to
Mhm.
catch a train, right?
Right.
But beyond that, there is no such thing as time. We all that happens is change. The day becomes the night becomes the day, the leaves fall off the trees, we celebrate Christmas, etc. These are changes, these are events of change, and we track them and call it time. But it's a man made construct. Time is not a dimension either. In fact, time only exists as an energy, and time exists as an energy for human beings at the point of trauma. And so, trauma, at the point of trauma, an energy is released. And that energy determines how long you'll live, whether you'll get cancer, heart disease, and all the rest of it. But beyond health, it does so much more than that. It shapes your entire life. It shapes who you think you are. It shapes how you think the world works. And so much more besides. And it is drives everything. It drives everything about you and me and why we are what we are and what we do. And until we recognize that, profound healing is very difficult because, the effects are so profound. And when I use the term trauma, I think most people think of something quite extreme, whether it's a battlefield or incest or something horrible like that. But trauma is actually any separation from the world. And that happens when the world doesn't perform in the way we want it to. And that actually, the Timelight definition is trauma.
Mhm.
Um, but in so doing, it amplifies the sense of me and creates you. So now, because of trauma, which is to me when the world doesn't behave as you want it to, I become dominant and you become less. I am now the subject of everything, and you will always be the object. The world
Mhm.
around me is now my object. Only I, the subject, is preeminent. And that happens as another result of trauma. The split has occurred, and now there is me, who is utterly separate from this world, over which I have very little influence.
It must be a way of a reactive way to insulate my
Yes, that's right.
control.
So that's exactly right. Because what happens is, the trauma creates the energy which seeks affirmation in the world,
Mhm.
and you will increasingly see and do things that can concur with that energy, with that
Mhm.
original insight, and it
Yeah.
will seek validation in the world. You
Because
know,
there's a separation of understanding of identity at that moment, isn't it?
it is
That's the
absolutely
deterioration of
well.
identity.
It is the creation of a false identity.
A false identity, right? Because I'm thinking original identity, right? It's that
Well,
original.
the original identity is, as we said at the beginning, you're an eternal being.
Yeah,
But
totally.
we lose that because of trauma, because that we create time.
Yeah.
And a being in time cannot be at the same time eternal, because either you're in time or you're not in time. And so that's
Mhm.
really what's going on. But what is interesting beyond that point is that the trauma also creates a self that is the creation of the problem. Now, that makes very little sense. Let me unwrap that a little bit. For example, there are a number of things that can manifest as a result of the trauma, such as depression, anger, phobia, and all the rest. And let's take anger as one example. So, what is quite common is that you start becoming quite angry. I had a hair trigger temper. I had outsized reactions to things in life. And all of this was the result of that trauma when I was a small child. But what really was going on, well, the standard definition is Bryan has anger problems.
Mhm.
But the Bryan that has anger problems was a creation of the energy that manifested as anger, if
Yeah,
that makes sense. But
totally.
there was no difference at all between the self that was angry and the anger. The self that saw itself as having anger issues was the creation of the energy of anger itself. Now,
Mhm.
that's quite a profound insight. But when you see that, real true healing becomes much more possible because there's not me to work on, there is the energy itself to work on,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So, and
Totally.
if one of the mantras of Timelight for the therapist is treat them process, not the manifestation. The
Yeah.
process is the energy of time. And what we really have to do is change our relationship to the energy of time, and then the manifestations disappear.
Here's something that's coming to mind, a question for you
Yeah.
is, so we're talking about time, but doesn't, we really put a pin in the world for time moment when trauma exists, when trauma, we experience trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the question. We are born into time. We
Yeah.
have a beginning, and our physical form has a beginning, and our physical form has an end. That is also a pin, if you will, a start and an end in time. So,
Okay.
how does that fit into this?
Okay. Let's unpack all that because that's quite a profound question. Yeah, we create the pin a moment of birth. You're born on such and such a date and such a year. But remember, that is a measurement created by us. We have created July, and we have created 1976.
But it
We
is
have.
a moment still.
Hmm?
I know humans have given it words, but it is a physical moment as well.
Yes, it is, and indeed that will have an end too, and we'll call that death.
Hmm.
But this isn't just that. But as you were saying, Janelle, as we come into the world, we come pre-packed with
Yeah,
these energies.
for sure. Yeah,
No one comes in innocent.
right,
And so it isn't just what happens to you as a child,
right.
it's what's happening to you through the generations, and you are the latest manifestation of that energy.
Mhm.
Because the first, well, you know all this, Janelle, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do too, that everything is energy.
Yeah.
And if you can see everything as an energy system, what I just said sort of makes a lot more sense because we are always dealing with the energetic patterns from whatever happened to prior generations, and which we can be doomed to repeat unless we wake up to those patterns.
Mhm.
The idea of alcoholism, gambling, etc., run through generations. And indeed, the trauma of previous experience of previous generations, whether it's famine, concentration camps, and awful things, come through and live with you as well. But it's essentially the same thing. And that whether it happened to you in your lifetime or it is an energy you are bringing in, is essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
um, but it still has to be worked on.
Yeah, because we'll
Because
have
if
the
you,
same effect, won't we? You
mm,
mentioned that the anger, you mentioned your anger, and
yeah,
that wasn't really the thing that was needing worked on. It was the root, if we call it the
it was the
root,
process behind which manifests as anger.
behind
Yeah,
it. We come to the planet with these. Like I was sharing with you earlier, I had
yeah,
that experience. My ancestors had that trauma, extended trauma in their history, and it was manifesting in my gut, which manifested in neck pain and shoulder pain. But it wasn't mine. It
right.
echoed in my life, but it wasn't mine.
No,
And we could
that
have treated
surely
my
was not
neck
yours.
all day long.
But that's correct. That was not yours, Jenna. But actually, none of it is yours. The point is that you who identifies with this is manufactured by the energy itself.
Hmm.
And that really is quite an important point. Yeah, but we identify with this because, well, that's what we are, because we are very body oriented.
Yeah.
And we because we have divided ourselves between the subject and object, the subject, it amplifies the experience. And so that's what's really going on. And it really just requires us to recognize this. I mean, maybe just to simplify this a bit. For example, now last week, I don't know, the news in the States. I'm sure it was the same as it was in the UK. The autobiography of Virginia Giuffre came out. Now, the poor woman, as a young girl, was trafficked by Epstein. And the question really is, was she a free agent when she went to Epstein and allow him to do all these things that he wanted to do? And in the autobiography, she reveals that she was abused as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the energy? What was the person? It appeared that Virginia, a body in space and time, was being with Jeffrey Epstein. But how much agency did she actually have? How much agency did I have when I suffered from chronic depression and wanted to kill myself? The answer is none. And that, and this is there. We live according to two uh, unobserved assumptions. The first is that I am an individual who has agency and who makes choices in life. That is false. The second one is that time is linear and can only go forward, and that yesterday is done and there's nothing you can do about it, and the past is the past. That is also false,
Yeah.
because if there's no such thing as time, then whatever happened to you at the age of 4 is alive and well and living in you right now until you see that and try and do something about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't have free will and be an agent until you're free of the past.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, I mean, doesn't mean you suffer from amnesia, but what it means is that the power of the past has no control over. Uh,
You, yeah, you said something, and I think this is going to tie in and also bring some insight for our listeners. Is that there's three parts to time, or there's three parts that we connect to. Like it, yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit? I'm a
I
little
can. I'm
clear
sorry.
on what
I
that
touched on
means.
that and didn't really elaborate. So let me do so. Yeah, we're made up of three time cells, if you like. The first is present time, but we are within present time, which is now, which is whatever you want to call it. But and it's the place of all the sciences and what have you, and it's also the place where you exist as a simple being. So we have simple needs and simple fears and all the rest of it as a body-oriented being in, if you like, present time. I'm I'm using terms which aren't accurate, but we can't be so pure that we have to use these terms of reference. Otherwise, we'd really probably end up saying nothing at all. But there is a present, and we have that simple fears such as one can be, for example, frightened of a dog and say that out of self-preservation I cross the road and stuff like that. The basic fears, basic desires, whether it's for sex, uh, you know, food, shelter, all these basic things. Then we have the past, but the past is split into three parts. There's the psychological one, which we have sort of touched on a little bit in our talk so far. But there are two others. The other is the narrative past, and that is the story of me and you, and where we believe we were born, and the name that we were given, and all the rest of it. And the third and the most benign past self is knowledge that I know how to tie my shoelace, or I know how to put my clothes on in the morning. And amazingly, it's an act of memory that we can do these things. But that is the third past self. And the final part, which is the shining, beautiful, creative part, is what I call the potential. People can call it the soul, the Atman, or whatever you want to call it. But that is the place where all possibilities exist. But they get shrunk down by the energies of time into what we experience now. And so, but is potential means that all possibilities exist in that place. And that is essentially what we are. We are this eternal thing. We are limitless and eternal and all these things, which we get shrunk into this little tiny little thing called time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's but I say it's our tragedy, and it sort of is, but it's also a necessary tragedy. Every human being has to understand this and pass through it, because that's really our function, is to really finally understand time and become and live and manifest as the eternal being that we actually are.
Hmm.
And everyone gets that once they're dead, but really the trick is to do it when you're still alive.
Right.
That's really where we want to get to.
And
Yeah,
what's the barrier to that? What's the barrier to connecting to that truth?
is what I've just been describing. It is we a lot of people intellectually know it. I mean, I suppose we did a poll of most people around the planet and said, "Do you think you have a soul? Do you think you have an eternal self?" Most people probably say, "Yeah, I think I do. I believe I do. I hope I do. I have faith that I do." But very few have a direct experience of it and say, "Well, I don't believe it. I know it, and furthermore, I'm living it," and that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So what stops us is a, a, we are creations of time, and a creation of time cannot know the timeless. It's as simple as that. So therefore, to me, I believe that time, or the energy of time, is the single biggest challenge every human being faces.
Okay. Once we step into that knowing, once we start seeking that truth, to not just have it intellectually, yeah, it's out there sort of thing, like you're describing, but no, I'm here. What changes about us, about our thinking when we get that?
What will we enter the timeless state? Well, for one thing, everything it changes subtly. It's not, what changes is that you are joyful. You are in a state of great joy all the time,
Mm.
all the time. Nothing can shake that. Of course, you have issues in life. Someone still sends you a bill, but you deal with it. And you see everybody else, that everybody else is this same thing that you're experiencing, but they don't know it. And
Mm.
so it's it's just a it's just a delicious, wonderful way to live your life. Every day is just an amazing blast. It really is. The sheer beauty of it, the miracle of everything, is beyond expression. But to live that every moment is, wow, it's mind blowing. So that's that. I
Okay.
suppose that's it. And to bring joy into other people's lives and demonstrate that this is what you are. And I try to do that every day with people, and just I don't say this to them, but I hope through some demonstration of the
Right.
time of state, just being with them, they might sort of get it a bit.
And you'd mentioned that trauma puts a pin, my interpretation of how you said that, puts a
Mm,
pin in time. And to be timeless, to be embodying timelessness, that part of us, it would
mm.
make sense to me that to do that, these pins may pin us to time. So to truly be able to shift, how does healing traumas interplay in this, if at all?
Okay, well, I
Or
think pin is a difficult analogy because whilst one can say, for example, as I could say, well, I was, abused from the age of 2 to the age of 7 or 8. So in that sense, if you like, it's a pin. It is not a pin because it's a fluid experience that carried on into adulthood.
okay.
And whilst you can sort of say, as a matter of historical record, that happened between these years, that's not very interesting. It's not very helpful because really the fact of the matter is it's with you now. That's the point. The point is, I mean, I don't know if you know a psychiatrist called Bessel van der Kolk, who did a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And in that, he relates his work with traumatized patients. And in one section, he says, it didn't matter whether the trauma happened 40 years ago or essentially, last year, it is as if it's with them now.
Hmm.
And you really see that in cases of PTSD, where, of course, soldiers have been through terrible wars. Relive that. It's vivid. It's right in front of them now. And
Hmm.
that's essentially what is happening to everybody who's traumatized. That this energy is there now and shaping your life, creating your life, making you make decisions in your life, making you see yourself in a certain way. Oh, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'll never be loved. Yeah, and so on and so forth are expressions of that energy.
And it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's like, okay, we say it happened here and in a moment of time, but it actually, and then you say it keeps us from moving forward. So it's almost like, yes, this travels with us, but really, is it kind of in a sense keeping us back
um,
until it's healed?
yeah. I mean, well, it does. And we have to recognize that. I think to in order to move on, we have to recognize deep down what the processes really are, in order for us to live a fulfilled and happy life. I mean, I have these things called the 20 keys, and they are keys because each of them is some sort of issue or view you have about yourself or a behavior you have.
Hmm.
And these are things that people would regard as quite negative things. But I call them keys because each of them is a way in. And if you can say, for example, one of the worst for a traumatized person, and I certainly knew this, is you're deprived of love. And you cannot love and you cannot feel love. And for me as a human being, I think that's the single most tragic thing that a
Hmm.
traumatized person experiences. But it's also a key because if you can actually really dig down and say, well, why do I have that feeling? Why do I think that's true? And start unraveling it. It can sort of start to begin the journey of waking up. So each of those keys is a very important way of helping people really understand the processes that are going on, which are being thought up into these expressions.
And as those expressions shift, as those old frequencies, old events shift, then really it's like getting a new lens. Like we often speak to us about that. Like that's talk therapy. Let's try to talk myself into health. Why isn't that as effective as just getting down to this root?
Because that's an intellectual reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And if you say, well, look, I don't, I feel that, I'm holding myself back. I feel, and you can rationalize it, and you
Mm-hmm.
can say, oh no, I'm better than that. I can do better than that. And maybe you can. Maybe something can happen, but you have essentially rationalized it. And until you get down into the energy of it, until you see the processes beneath that thought, the profound change is very difficult to achieve. It's only when you really work at that deep processing level that you are going to achieve that profound healing. If you don't go that deeply, you are modifying behavior,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not achieving a radical transformation. And I think really that's where we want to be aiming for.
Yeah. And it locks us into that cycle, actually. It locks us
So
into, like, when I think, oh, I've got to change that behavior, I got to change that behavior, and I do all this work around it. And that behavior really isn't even the issue. But by fixing and working, I'm locking myself in that place. If I
yeah,
go to the root, I'm just going to leapfrog over that because it's not really even the thing. It's just an effect. So when that
yeah,
root's healed, you just leapfrog over that.
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, and there are trivial things where, for example, you're always late, and you can improve that behavior. You can discipline yourself to be on time,
Mhm.
and that's great. But you've never really understood the underlying process of why it was you were late in the first place.
Yeah.
And you sort of need to get that deep. I mean, that's a trivial example and probably
Right.
not a very good one. But if you are an alcoholic, if you have an addiction to drugs or whatever it might be, which is also a manifestation of trauma,
Mhm.
then yes, you can sort of mentally gird yourself to say, well, I won't drink so much or whatever it might be. But the underlying process, the underlying energy has not been addressed.
Yeah. And it's really, thank you for saying that. And I think that being late is totally on because even what we would consider a little thing, maybe that's not, that feels little compared to some other bigger, right, with the drinking and other kind of
Yeah,
challenges can have. But all of those are our body's way of saying, hey, I need you to look into something. And it feels like to me, see, I would love your perspective on this, that we've been trained through different ways for different reasons to just go and stay here in this mind of ours. We've been
sure.
trained to do that. But I feel like it's our body's way of saying, I need you to look deeper. I need you. This is happening. It's got your attention.
Yeah.
Please take a look at the why
Yeah,
behind
I think that's a good point because it isn't just a case of saying, oh, it manifests through alcoholism, not feeling I can't be loved or whatever, or self-sabotage, but it
it.
also manifests in the body as disease. It
Yeah.
can happen there too. So and even when I say, well, with people, and I have been running a magazine for 30 years called What Doctors Don't Tell You. So, yeah, we know a lot about health, but then when you apply the Timelight model, I say, well, look, go through the time cells to understand if you are talking about illness. One is go through present time. So, in that sense, what's in your environment, what's in your diet, deal with those things first and clean all that up. If the disease is still there, then look at the psychological side of things, look at the trauma, and then finally look at the potential, look at what you've been blocking. Why are you not doing really the wonderful things that you really do want to do? But you've been held back because you believe what matters is really your responsibility of being a mother, or because you what someone has told you, and you've always blocked yourself. There's a great cancer specialist called Bernie Siegel, and he used to do that. He used to deal with end stage cancer patients. I said, well, it's getting pretty close to the end here. When are you going to do what you really want to do in your life? You know, when are you going to write the poem? When are you going to, whatever it might be? It doesn't have to be artistic, it could be anything. And we do block ourselves, and so that was an important thing as well. So you go through different layers of time to understand health issues as well, and
Yeah.
that can be very as a very helpful way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. On that line, are there any other misconceptions about healing past trauma that you would like to clear up for our audience?
Well, one of the biggest misconception, I mean, and I think I mean, the great news is that I think trauma is now on the agenda. We all talk about it. 10, 15 years ago, we sort of didn't. And so we're talking about it, and that's fantastic. People like Gabor Mate, you really put it on them in the conversation. So brilliant stuff. But the fundamental thing I say where people are not dealing with is still seeing a, an individual with makes decision who happens to have had trauma, and that is a fundamental misconception,
Mm.
and this is until that is really understood, and I think, but is the basis of all psychotherapy is the idea of an individual who has agency, who makes decisions in life, who happens to have. And I think the profound insight that Timelight offers is that, well, no, what matters is the manifestation of the trauma, which has created a person who believes he's responsible, and that person is not there. It's a fiction. It's created by the trauma itself. Yeah, and you can see it in things like, for example, um, if you've ever really seen red and been so angry, and you're not there, it's just pure anger, and is really like a few seconds kick in and suddenly a person appears. Oh my God, what have I just said, done, etc., etc. At which point the person then owns the anger or is created by the anger, if you like, to be more precise, and then we'll do one of two things. He'll either apologize, or more likely he'll steam on and carry on justifying the anger in the first place and does even more hurt. But the point is just that pure moment of energy when there is just anger, there is nobody there.
Mhm.
And that's a great example of it, but normally it's a lot more subtle than that. And so therefore we don't recognize the fact that we, or the I that is suffers anger, was the creation of the anger itself. And that's, so if you say, well, what's the one big difference, I would say it's that.
Okay. Okay. And there's some beautiful, you've done some science, done some studies, and have some scientific backing to the effectiveness of your techniques.
Yeah, we have. I mean, obviously, there's a main. I mean, I'd love to do real big blind placebo studies. That would set me back $1 million. So right now, I can't do that. But we obviously have a lot of case study material where we've done this work with many hundreds, if not thousands, of people at
Mm.
workshops, and where it's been effective. We've also It's been trialed at a German clinic. So in that sense, that's as sciencey as right now as we can make it. But I'd love to do more, and I'd
Mm.
love to have it, demonstrated or tested on a much bigger scale. But right now, this is probably as far as we can go until we can get the funds. I mean, in the meantime, I have put together a training program which has been certified now by quite. So it is a certified course for therapists and life coaches, and indeed anyone who wants a career change where they want to do something more meaningful in their life, where I'm training people up to become accredited Timelight therapists.
Okay.
And I'd just love more and more people to come and teach this stuff, because I think that the world really needs it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We do. I agree. And I'm grateful for the work that you've done. It's been groundbreaking. You've put a lot of energy into it yourself for your personal healing and helping others heal by walking them through the steps that you've created in your Timelight um, program. So
Yes,
thank you for that. And
thank
so
you.
I would like, because I know when we get to the root, the problem will cease to exist. That's
Correct.
just a rule.
That's correct. And you see, that's the thing, that it is dealing with the root, and you know this because you're a great healer yourself, Janelle. But that's where the level you have to be working, and anything else is a modification. And
Yeah.
indeed, anything you try to do to resolve the problem comes from the problem.
Yeah.
When you think about it,
Totally.
So if for example, let's go back to our anger, example again. Yeah. If I decide the angry outbursts are ruining my marriage, and it's wretched for my children, and I seek therapy for that. The drive to be done with the anger comes from only one place, and that's anger. And
Mhm.
that's why you have to go deeper. Because if I wasn't angry, I wouldn't be seeking the therapy. So the drive comes from the anger.
Mhm.
And so therefore we have to say, well, rather than try and deal with it, understand as you do the processes that go beneath that matter so much more than just dealing with the manifestation of it.
Yeah.
And and I think that's really where the healing happens.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if listeners are resonating with you right now, Brian, and I know they are, how can they find you, connect to your work?
Okay, well, thanks, Janelle. Yeah, so the website's Timelight Therapy, all one word. And light is Light, not American LITE. TimelightTherapy.com. And I've put together a free video where you can go and watch a lot more and understand, well, is this for me or isn't it? Does this resonate with me? And from there, there's a training program, and I really do want to train people up to do this and become spiritual warriors for me,
Yeah,
and really, I think that's where we're going to change the world,
that's it.
because when I mentioned about the past selves, I just would just, in this world of great trouble, it is the marriage of the narrative and the psychological pasts,
Mhm.
which is the home of all conflict and all war. Because the psychological side is the hurts, which can be my hurts, it could be the hurts of my race, it can be the hurts of my generation, it can be the hurts of people who've long since died, but which I'm bringing into the world. So you got the hurts coupled with the narrative, my story, which is my people's story. I was born in wherever I was born, and I was raised in such a way. The fusion of those two is the birthplace of all conflict in the world. And it's not meant to sound trivial, but it's true that all war, all conflict is an act of memory.
Mm.
And you
Wow.
think, well, hold on a minute, that can't be right. But it is right. And if you were did have a magic wand and you're able to make everyone have amnesia, no one remembered that they were Muslim, Jew, Christian, or where they were born, or their stories of all the terrible horrors that have happened to them and their race and their forebears. That all just appear. Where is the conflict? It's gone. There's no conflict. So all conflict, all war is an act of memory.
Mm.
And we can't make people amnesiacs, unfortunately. So we have to work through that. And so for that reason too, I just really feel that we want to make people realize they are eternal souls, and that's the birthright every human being has, and really to experience that before he dies. But also to create a world where where there is not conflict. I mean, every time a child is born, everybody in the world owns that child. We all have that responsibility to raise that child in peace and love. And we're not doing it, are we? We're really not doing it. So I think for that reason too, boy, don't we need this stuff, Uh, you know, don't you think? I mean, how much more do we have to do? How many more children do we see it on the news every night? It's hardly bearable. You can't watch the stuff. That's what we're doing. And you
Mm.
think, well, how many more children do we have to destroy before we say, how crazy are we?
Yeah. And I know. And when we heal, when we heal at this level that you're describing and that you're walking yourself through and others, when we heal at that level, our lens and perspective changes. So, like you said,
Exactly.
that hate, that memory shifts,
And
and
that's,
the
yeah,
gold of the lesson stays with us.
oh,
Every journey piece has its lesson, and we get to keep that. We get to
yeah.
transition the hate, the guilt, the shame, the fear, and
Mm-hmm,
we get to bring that gold forward, which is the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding that we can rebuild thinking through an
mm-hmm,
elevated lens. So when we're
mm-hmm,
really talking about let's make a difference, that
mm-hmm.
is key.
Yeah, that's
That is,
very well said, Janelle. Absolutely right. And I feel like I've been preaching to the choir and talking to you, Janelle, but I hope that people listening or watching may resonate with this as well and think,
they
oh, well,
will.
that's interesting.
Brian, it is. Your insight and the work you've done is deep, and it is what we're ready for. I think as society, we're ready for this. And my audience, I'm so glad that you're here on this day for this conversation because it's right on time. Brian's work is right on time. So I'm so glad, Brian, that you're here speaking with us. And those that have joined us, I'm really just holding space for you because you're on time as well. This was no accident that you're hearing this when you did. So, Brian, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And we are going to make your website. You have a beautiful website, by the way. Just kudos to you for creating that. And we're going to
I
make
wish I did. People far better than me did that, but
Oh
anyway.
yeah, I know. I totally rely on them as well. We love them. We're making so look in the comments where you can grab all the information. Brian's website, his what he's doing now with the course training you how to work in light and light system. Is that correct? Did I get that correct?
Pretty much Timelight.
Thank you. I thought that didn't feel
You
right.
missed out the
Go
time.
edit that piece out, Brian. I'm like, that didn't feel right. Yeah, when
Close enough. Close
close
enough.
enough. Yeah. So you can get connected to Brian and his Timelight system and just see how you can be a part of that. So that is a wrap. We thank you again for being here at Table Talks, everybody that joined us. And Brian, we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you, Janelle. A wonderful interview, and thank you for asking such smart questions. Thank
You
you.
bet. Aren't you glad you were here? It is about, and I just 100% agree with Bryan, that it is about getting to the root. When we get down to why something exists in our body and heal there, then the symptom just ceases to exist. We can do a lot of work around an area of, let's see, I just really need to to get to work on time. I mean, that's one, right? For some people, I really need to lose the weight. I really need to um, start managing my time better. I just feel like I'm wasting so much time. When you feel yourself saying, I need to or should, that is your sign that there's a root that's ready to be seen. How do you see those roots? How do you find them? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about. This episode is about how that trauma influences our thinking. And we also think that I need to shift my thinking, but really it's about just heal the trauma. So if you have questions about that and you would like to say, Janelle, I found my, what I keep saying I need to, or I should in my life, then book a call with me and let's talk about that and see how that could shift for you. Love that you're here. Appreciate you. And I look forward to meeting you.